Welcome to the Daily Show. People, hello. Hope all you are well. Hope everything is going well to start the new year. It has been a blessing to been doing this for over 3 years now. Again, thank you for your love and your support at all times. I want to start really quick, just giving love and prayers to Damar Hamlin. We are recording this after the events that happened in the game, and just love and prayer sent to him and his family. We are all wishing him the best and hoping he's okay. And just hoping that everyone is around him and giving him as much love as possible because these are tough times. And regardless of what we do and what we love, this is human life, and we all hope that he is okay. Without further ado, I would love to introduce our guest for this week. It's Mr. Michael Eaves. Woohoo!
What's
Uh,
up?
First of all, Mr. East, it is a pleasure and honor to just be able to sit down and talk with you. Thank you so much. And how's the New Year treating you so far? How are you doing so far this year?
Uh, so far so good in terms of, I'm well, my family's well, but you were just mentioned Damar Hamlin, and I was on SportsCenter last night for that coverage, and um, I couldn't help but to remember back in 2020 when Kobe Bryant died, and I was working that day, and that was a breaking news day, and both of those days you went into the day not expecting someone to die. We don't expect someone to die. And thankfully, that did not happen to Damar Hamlin. But there for a few minutes, we thought that was the case
Mhm.
in Cincinnati. And to have to cover, tragedies is never an easy thing. And you may be equipped for it in terms of professional manner, but emotionally, you're never prepared for that. But you just have to persevere through and do the job. And I thought, from an ESPN standpoint, collectively, we did a really good job last night. All of my colleagues, but especially Ryan Clark, was spectacular in his role, trying to give us an idea of what it would be like for a player in that moment, whether they were on the field or not. And he just did an exceptional job of giving us some insight that I don't know if we could have gotten from anywhere from anyone else. Right. So in that regard, it was a good night for coverage and journalism and what we were trying to give the viewers and the fans at home. But personally, I mean, I hated every second of it.
Mhm.
You wish it never happened.
Right.
And so, like, this is just what, January 2nd.
Mhm.
I'm like, hope this is not the start of 2023 the way 2020 started. But again, to your point, as you said earlier, just so thankful that Damar Hamlin is doing well considering what happened last night. His family released a statement. They're very thankful for all the support, and hopefully that young man gets out of the hospital very, very soon and can resume a normal, healthy life.
I want to say that kind of the same thing. I was talking to a good friend, Joe Buck, Troy Aikman, Ryan Clark, Scott Van Pelt, yourself as well. The situation was handled almost perfectly. Um,
Lisa Salters on the field getting
yes,
insight.
yes.
Coley Harvey, Ben Baby, who were two of our reporters on site, that they had to switch into a different mode. Alina Getzenberg, who covers the Bills, she ended up giving us perspective on ESPN last night. And then another thing too, man, it's my first tweet. I sent out a social media tweet last night because I was proud of my coworkers.
Hmm.
Right.
Right.
I don't want to always compare ourselves to teams, but we are a team at ESPN,
Hmm.
right? And we are proud when someone else does well because it represents us and the job at hand, right? But I also went on social media early this morning after I woke up and thanked all the people that you don't see. It's the producers, the directors, the graphics operators, the researchers, the editors, the camera operators. Like all of those people were also in full on breaking news coverage mode last night, and they allowed us to be in a position to do the job as well as we could and perform the task that was necessary, right? And all the people that we mentioned deserve all the praise that they received because they were in that moment and they had to go on camera and present that information to the viewing public. But it was also the people that were in place to put them in that position, whether it's establishing the live shots there at the hospital in Cincinnati, which was not planned for the entire day. Why would you plan to do
Hmm.
a live shot from a hospital 10 minutes away from the stadium? So that had to happen in real time. And it happened very quickly. So we had people in place to provide that coverage. Or then what Scott did coming off the game They did maybe 45 minutes, maybe an hour, I'm not sure, without a commercial break. You don't plan television. You don't do television that way. And then to your point about Troy Aikman and Joe Buck, they are a play-by-play announcer and an analyst. They don't do breaking news,
Mm-hmm.
but in that moment they had to, and they were getting it as it was happening, and when there was no information. The only information that we had is what we could see with our cameras. We saw that he was down, he was being tended to. We didn't know exactly what was happening. We sure as hell didn't know what the injury was or the condition was. And you're having to provide coverage with no information. While doing so with the proper tone that is required based on the seriousness of what is happening, right? Those guys don't do that normally, and I thought they did it tremendously well. So again, that is some of the realities of doing television sometimes, and journalism is you prepare for certain things, but there's going to be a moment or maybe a few in your lifetime that you're not prepared for, and you still have to do the job. And the same thing with Kobe Bryant, almost 3 years ago now, is that I think it was maybe 25 minutes before we went on the air,
Mm-hmm.
we knew he was dead. And so I was supposed to be on the air for another 3 hours, but all of a sudden I have to go get dressed and just go on the air and say Kobe Bryant's dead. And then that day, Zubin Mehenti and I did 6 hours, 6 consecutive hours of coverage. The first 3 hours, we did not have a commercial break. 3 hours with no commercial breaks. And we are just getting people on the phone. We're getting interviews, all these other things. We just don't know what's coming up next. We're just kind of rolling, right? We were not prepared for that. No one was prepared for that. But that's the job. And that's what you have to do. And I'm just so proud of everybody last night from our standpoint, but also the people there in Cincinnati, the medical team. Because, I mean, they gave that man CPR over the course of a 9-minute period on the field. 9 minutes worth of CPR. If you know anything about medicine and keeping people alive, his heartbeat was not there for a while, and they brought that man back to life, and that is just remarkable. And again, I'm as much as I hated doing everything we had to do last night, I'm just so thankful that the story turned out much better than it could have been.
Um, before I love that we got to talk about that really quick because, and someone that just loves sports and wants to become a sports journalist, I've always wondered. You guys have a certain thing that you're supposed to talk about on air. You go over rehearsal, you take your notes and stuff. But when things such as this happen, it kind of just throws all of that away, and you have to kind of recourse your
Mm-hmm.
mind about what you're talking about. Can I ask? And then we'll get to the normal interview guys. But can I ask, when things like that happen, what's going through your producer's minds, your mind, in terms of, I had this ready, but now I have to say this. And when you're thinking about it, what are some particular things that maybe you think I need to be saying or talking about while I'm on air?
In those moments, what you go back to are your fundamentals,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, and again, I'm gonna make another sports analogy. Let's say it's basketball and it's a high stress situation, and the play that you called is not going to be effective,
Yeah.
and you have to do something else because you have no other choice. What you rely on in that moment without thinking about it is your fundamentals. What is the fundamental aspects of basketball that I'm going to have to initiate here to get some type of positive result, right? You're reacting, you're not thinking because your fundamentals are so strong, you don't have to think about them. And Steph Curry is maybe the greatest example of that right now, or maybe LeBron James. They're so great at what they do that when something goes bad, they can still do something well because their fundamentals are so strong, right? So when it comes to journalism and reporting, it is about your fundamentals. It is who, what, when, where, and why. Okay, that is the most basic, right? So if those things are in your mind, either consciously or subconsciously, you should be able to do the job very well. Number one. Number two, it's like putting in reps as an athlete. Okay. If you are Tiger Woods and you are trying to win your 15th major at Augusta National, and you've done it several times before, but it's been a while since you had done it, and now you're back in that high stress situation, where do you gain the confidence to hit the shot at number 12 to put yourself in a position to make par instead of making double like the guys in your group did? Or you get to 16 and you know the shot to hit to put it in 3 feet so you can make birdie. The reason you have confidence to do that because you've hit that shot maybe 1,000 times in practice, right? And it's the same thing with people who do what I do. And I tell young people coming up in the business today, you got to get your reps in when no one's watching. Okay. And your reps are about your presentation. It's also about your writing, right? You've got to do all of that work when it's not an assignment in class, when it's never going to see air. It's not going to be on YouTube. No one's going to see it but you are working on your craft to make sure you're better. You're writing something out, you're looking at it and saying, how can I write it better? The better writer you are, the better ad-libber you are. So like last night, when I was doing that interview with Ryan Clark, I didn't have one question written down, not one, right? When would I have time to come up with a question based on everything we were trying to accomplish, right? So I had to rely on my fundamentals and my writing ability to ask him coherent questions to get the perspective that was required. That was all fundamentals, and that was all about the reps I've been doing for the last, you know, 20 plus years. That's what it is. That's how you do it. And from a producer standpoint, because at one time in my career when I very first started, I was a producer before I was on air. And so at that point, you're like, what do we need to give the audience? Information: who, what, when, where, why. What do I have available to me in terms of assets and resources to provide that information? Then you start going through all that. Again, that's reactionary. Like, we need someone at the hospital in case there's a report to find out exactly what's happening. Do we have someone outside the locker room to see what's happening with the teams as they're talking to the NFL about postponing the game? Camera here, reporter there. Do we have a producer? What is biographical information about Damar Hamlin? Second round pick. So you ask your researcher. Sixth round pick out of Pittsburgh 2 years ago. He started 14 of the 16 games he's played. Like, that information, how do we get it? And then how do we give it to the people at home? Again, fundamentals, reactionary, because you've been doing it for so long and you put in the work. You have to put in the work if you want to be really good at this job.
Thank you for those words. My mom's going to enjoy that especially. But I say that because the media and you guys as well get scrutinized so much for what you do at times. But you also don't realize how much work and passion goes into what you do. So your word and your advice and the examples that you just said mean so much to me.
And Dylan, let me add one thing, and I apologize for interrupting you,
You're
because
good.
you did say the media. And what people have to understand, there's a very distinct difference between media and journalist. Okay. If you are a journalist, you are part of the media. But just because you're part of the media does not make you a journalist. Okay. Anyone has access to technology that can allow them to be part of the media now. Social media. Zoom is a medium that people use to give their opinions to the world. Sports, politics, entertainment, what have you, right? Too often, I believe, from a viewer standpoint, is they don't understand the line, or they don't recognize the line between who is a media personality and who is a journalist. Now, there are journalists like myself and like Stephen A. Smith and Scott Van Pelt who blur that line sometimes because we go back and forth,
Hmm.
right? I'm a journalist, but I also have opinions, and I don't have a problem sharing those opinions that becomes analysis or criticism,
Right.
right? Stephen A. Smith, journalist, first and foremost, has now transitioned to an area where he is an entertainer from a sports media aspect, but he is a journalist at heart, right? But not everyone who does it is. And I don't want to name any names in terms of people who aren't that, but you have to be discerning when it comes to information that you are retaining and then sharing. There's a difference between an opinion and a fact. Journalists give facts, analysts give opinions. Now, if you were Dan Orlovsky or Ryan Clark and you're an analyst and you want to make a point, you can back up your point with facts, statistics, perspective, what have you. But anyone who says anything is not necessarily a journalist. And I think the those who consume content need to be a little more discerning about that, because the roles are different and they are distinct. And I think it helps from a viewing standpoint if you understand those roles and who is who in the moment that they are sharing whatever that information may be.
Mr. Eaves, do you mind giving, most people know who you are just because I talk so much about who you are, and your peers as well that I've been able to get a chance to talk to as well. But do you mind giving a brief introduction about yourself, talk about where you're from, where you went to college, just some things you've been able to accomplish to help you get where you are today.
I grew up in a really small town in southwestern part of Kentucky called White Plains, maybe 700, 800 people in my hometown growing up. And then, of course, I went to the University of Kentucky to get my journalism degree. And I got my first TV job there in Lexington, which was very fortunate. Before I even graduated college, I started working for a local TV station there in the news department as a producer. I mentioned that earlier. And then eventually made the transition to on-air sports reporter, sports anchor. Then I went to Memphis, Tennessee for a while, for a couple years. I was there when the Grizzlies moved from Vancouver. John Calipari got the University of Memphis job, and Mike Tyson fought Lennox Lewis at the Pyramid. So it was a really cool time for me to be in Memphis. Then I went to Los Angeles for 10 years working for Fox Sports Net, covering the Lakers, Clippers, Dodgers, Angels. They had all the teams in Southern California at that time. And also did some national work for Big 12, Pac 12 football, basketball, hosted the men's tournament for Fox Sports for a few years there. And then I eventually moved to the East Coast 2013, been at ESPN now since 2015 as primarily a sports center anchor, but also do the Masters and PGA and UFC for us on ESPN Plus as well.
Um, at what age? Because sports journalism has been something I wanted to do for such a long time. At what age did that dream for you begin to start? And also, were there any people that you just loved their work in terms of their writing or maybe their on-air presentation? Was there any people that you kind of looked up to in the journalism world?
Yeah, I think the idea came to me when I was still in high school because I was an athlete growing up and young. When I was really young, obviously I had aspirations of being a professional, and then you get to a point where you have to realize your athleticism limits.
Right.
And then I got injured as well, so that just really threw out any hopes whatsoever. And so I was kind of thinking like, how do I still have a career in sports if I can't play them, right? And I thought about it, and I just realized how much I watch sports on television. Um, when I was 10 years old, and again, we lived in a very remote part of Kentucky. We didn't have cable television. And so my father bought us one of those big 12-foot satellite dishes that no one has anymore that you put in your backyard. And back then in the early to mid 80s, if you had one of those satellite dishes, you could pretty much watch anything around the country if you knew how to find it. And I became very good at finding games. I would watch games from New York to LA, Detroit. I'm watching hockey I never watched before. I'm watching, major indoor soccer, like all these things. I'm just absorbing all the sports content. And I was like, dude, that's the job, is like you can get paid to talk about the games, which you're probably going to do anyway if you're a sports fan, and then go to the games. Like, how great is that? Talk to the people involved in the games. So maybe my junior year, especially after I tore my ACL, I was like, this is what I want to pursue. And so when I eventually went to University of Kentucky and was registering for classes, I told the guidance counselor, this is what I want to do. What's the path? And that's how I got down the road of becoming a journalist and majoring in journalism. Um, and so that was the path, was that realization. And I forgot what your second question was because my first answer was so long.
What did you have any people that you kind of looked up to in the journalism field?
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, of course. I mean, it all the television I was watching, I was seeing people who were really good at their job, right? Back then, you had the three major networks. Actually, Fox didn't even exist back then. You had the three major networks, and then ESPN from a sports standpoint. I thought Brian Gumbel
Mhm.
was one of my biggest. I mean, I truly believe he's an icon of the industry. And what was interesting about Brian as well is how he went from sports to news.
Yeah.
Right, a lot of people see him on the Today Show, certain generation. And you see him on Real Sports and HBO, but he was a sports studio host, and that was the job I thought I wanted to do. James Brown, CBS, another. Like, what better job is there to talk about the game, send all the fans to the actual game, come back at halftime, talk about it again after the game. You talk about it. I just thought that was the coolest job, more so than wanted to do play-by-play. I thought that was the best job in television, and he was one of the people I really looked up to in terms of how he did the job, and then how he was also able to transition to news. Which I will say this, and I think a lot of people in our industry believe this as well. Sports broadcasters are the most versatile broadcasters in media. We can do anything. We can do news because sports is news. It's just more fun usually,
Mm-hmm.
but it takes a different set of skills to do it because so often we are ad-libbing the things we're talking about, where people who generally do news could not just fall into a sports breaking news story um, or give it any kind of depth if you're just doing like a Sports Center or NBA Countdown. That would be much harder for a person who's only done news their entire life to make that transition. Um, but yeah, there were people that you look up to, and then same time like you look up to them, but you don't want to duplicate them, right? I mean, from a Sports Center standpoint, Chris Berman, the way he calls highlights, no one can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I took from it is the fun that he had in calling them, right? Stuart Scott, who ended up being a really good friend of mine, he's just our birthdays are one day apart. He's just a couple years older than me. When he was first getting his run on Sports Center, and I was starting to do sports highlights as well in Kentucky, and he was saying things that I would say sometimes with me and my friends, and I would try to drop in highlights as well. He was just much better at it than me, and he was doing it on national television. But that gave me the confidence, like, yeah, man, it's your voice. How are you having fun when you're watching games? Well, then you translate that to the audience at home. So thankfully, there were several examples of people in terms of that have been successful doing it a certain way, and also that those were people of color. That meant a lot as well to say that, oh yeah, it can be done. It totally can be done, and it's just up to you to make it happen.
Um, I have had a few people in this field that I've looked up to and loved dearly. Jay Harris is one of them, and I had the beyond pleasure to speak and interview him a couple years ago. But Stuart Scott was the main reason that I wanted to fall in love with this passion of mine that I have. I would love. Could you talk about your relationship with him and what Stuart was like? I know he was a energetic and positive person on camera, but what was he like behind closed doors? I'm sure he was just like that as well, but talk about him behind closed doors as well.
Yeah, he was at times he was even more energetic
Hmm.
when the camera wasn't on. Now Stewart was just first and foremost he was a good person. All right, and oftentimes when people die, we always talk about the good things about him. But it's hard to talk about Stewart and not talk about the good things because you just can't find any bad things about him. He was just that good of a dude. He genuinely cared um, about people around him, not just his family and friends, but the people he worked with. And he shared that enthusiasm for life in everything he did. He and I first connected over golf. I'm a huge golfer. I've been playing since I was a kid, and he had picked up the game later in life, and that's that's how we bonded initially. But then he was the one who really got me to start looking at mixed martial arts and the UFC specifically as an upcoming sport that was going to be huge. And at first I was like, whatever. And then the more he talked about it, the more I got into it. And next thing you know, I'm hosting UFC Live for ESPN, right? And so life is kind of funny in that regard. But he he had the confidence to be himself when everyone was telling him not to be. So when he first started doing Sports Center and he was dropping in, the references that the culture would recognize, the establishment didn't get it. And because they didn't get it, they thought the audience wouldn't get it.
Yeah.
And oftentimes people in those positions don't understand that the audience is greater than the ones they recognize.
Mhm.
And Stewart became immensely popular because he spoke to the people who were rarely spoken to, us, people of color. And he was making references that we understood. I mean, as great as some of the other sportscasters at ESPN have been, like oftentimes, like I didn't get all of Chris Berman's references. Like he was referencing songs that I didn't know because they were, out before I was born or in a genre that I didn't pay that much attention to. Or other times, people would make references to Jerry Seinfeld. I've never watched an episode of Seinfeld, right? So I forgot who had the catchphrase, but it was "no soup for you." I was like, "What the hell is that?" Like
Mhm.
I didn't get it, right? But here's the thing: you don't have to always get every reference. You don't have to. It's fine. But when Stewart started doing it, because the white executives at ESPN were not getting the references, they thought it wouldn't work.
Mhm.
But me and my friends and people of that age, We got them all, and we thought it was clever as hell, right? So he was so dedicated to being himself and being authentic, right? Like I see too many examples of people who come on television and they try to be a sportscaster,
Mm.
or they try to be a sportscaster like Stuart Scott or like Michael Eaves or like Jay Harris. You can't do that because you aren't us, right? So you just have to be yourself while doing the job. Stuart was himself. He talked like that all the time. He had that energy all the time. So why try to be someone else when you probably won't be as good at it? Like authenticity matters. And if you try to imitate someone else or you try to fake some things, eventually you're going to get exposed. Um, so you're just wasting time trying to be someone else. Just be you and be really good at the job. Those two things will always work out, right? Don't force something because you think it's clever or you see someone else do it. That's not how success works, man. It's just not. You've got to be yourself, be authentic, be creative, be original,
Mhm.
all those things, as opposed to trying to force something because, again, you're just going to get exposed.
I love that. And Jay kind of told me the same thing. He said the best piece of advice he ever learned was from Stewart. He said just be you at all times. And so
Yeah,
I
100%.
love the consistency, and I just feel that's just really who he was, and that's how he really was. And I love every story and moment that I've gotten to hear about him. I want to go back to you. I know growing up in Kentucky and you attended the University of Kentucky, was there any other college consideration for you other than Kentucky? Were there any other schools that you looked at highly?
Um, Yeah, at one point I really wanted to go to Georgetown University, right? And it's mostly because of the basketball team. I'm not going to lie.
Hmm.
And then I remember, like I applied and I did get accepted. I was a really good student. I actually went to Kentucky on an academic scholarship, so I was a really good student. Um, but I was a, they accepted me, but I wasn't going to get a scholarship, right? And so I didn't realize that Georgetown was a private university at the time. And I'm like 17, I guess you're applying for college. I didn't know that. And then when I saw the tuition cost, I was like, oh, I'm clearly not going to Georgetown. My parents aren't rolling like that at all. So I thought I was going to go to Western Kentucky University, which is much closer to where I grew up, and also has a really good communication journalism program. And there's a local TV station in Bowling Green, really small. So I thought I was going to go there, but I didn't get a full scholarship university, Western Kentucky University. Out of the blue, I got a call from someone at UK that offered me the full academic ride, and that's why I went to Kentucky. Like before I actually stepped foot on campus to register for classes, I'd only been to Lexington two other times before that because that was 3 hours away from where I grew up. Um, I was a huge Kentucky fan as a kid, but 3 hours is a long way. you know, my dad was going to take me to Rupp Arena just to go see a game. I played in a basketball tournament there um, one time in Lexington, and then another time earlier in high school, we went there for some type of school trip or something. But I wasn't considering Kentucky as an option. I was going to go to Western or maybe Louisville, which is where all of my father's family had moved to, and I spent a lot of time there. But Kentucky kind of fell in my lap, and I'm very thankful that it did because I don't know. Look, do I think I would have been successful? Yeah, because I just believe in myself. But I know how my career laid out based on going to Kentucky and to get a job at a television station that was in market 69 at the time. So this was 1993 when I first started working at WKYT. To get that job there, I don't know if I would have gotten that job in Louisville, or if I would have gotten that job if I'd gone to another school. And from that job, to learn what I did there while I was still in school, graduated, they gave me a full time job. Like I never had to worry about getting a job right out of school, which for a lot of people pursuing this career is the hardest thing is to get the first job. I didn't have to do the first job again. It fell in my lap, and then I was able to, take that opportunity and run with it and be able and to get to the job that I actually wanted, which was on air sportscaster. So I'm just very thankful that I ended up at Kentucky when I did.
Mr. East, I talk so much about family. because my family has been just so prominent in my life and helped me to get where I am today. How much have your parents, your folks around you, your loved ones, just friends as well, how much have they meant to you in helping you follow the dream that you've always had and wanted to pursue?
My parents were always very supportive of anything that I pursued athletically. Um, Number one, I mean, from going to my basketball games and football games, and my dad was the one who taught me how to play golf and taking me to tournaments when I played junior golf. All those things, always very supportive. But they were really adamant about me being a really good student.
Hmm.
I don't know if they had dreams of me necessarily getting a full academic scholarship to college, um, but the the way they made me think about school put me in a position to do that. Like I'm a little competitive. I'm not uber competitive, but if I'm doing something, I want to do it really, really well. And I looked at classwork like playing games. Like you want to be the fastest kid on the playground if you're running a race. You want to be the best player uh, playing pickup basketball. Why would you want to be the best student in class? Like to me, I got way more satisfaction out of that than being the good athlete. I mean, if you are black, they expect you to be a good athlete.
Right.
They do not expect you to be the smartest kid in class. So getting those grades and having the teachers read those scores out loud, I took a lot of pride in that. I mean, I competed. Like I wanted to be smart. I wanted to get all A's. That desire I assume was instilled in me by my parents, and that put me on a path to you know be able to accomplish what I have. And my dad was all about it. My dad was as supportive as a father as anyone could ask for in all of those regards, but also reminding me, he's like, "Bruh, you need this education more than anything because as you know, especially that generation of black people said, if that don't work out, you got something to fall back on, right? But what it really does, it gives you the foundation not to fall, right? It gives you the foundation not to fall. And so I never doubted that I could accomplish it because I knew that I was smart. I had a good work ethic. I was going to be successful doing something. And it all started with just being really, really good in class.
What was college like for you? Being in a basically a completely new environment, and still, being the successful young man that you knew that you wanted to become. What was an experience like for you to be away from home for the very first time on your
um, I enjoyed it. I really did. Now, thankfully, you know, being an athlete, there I went to summer camp a
own?
lot, sports camps. And so every summer I did one or two camps, and I was always at a because where I lived there was nothing there, so I had to go somewhere else to do that thing. So I got a little taste of that experience of being away from home for like a week at a time, and being on a college campus, sleeping in the dorms. I had several experiences of that before I went to school, um, but I was also eager to be somewhere else. Right, I grew up in a really small town, and I knew at some early age I wasn't going to live there the rest of my life. I just wasn't. I enjoyed my childhood experience, but I knew it wasn't for me long term. So I looked forward to it. And then once I moved to Lexington to go to school, I never came back home to live. Never. Like not even the summer. I would come to visit, but I never moved back into my house at any point whatsoever because I was so determined to, go out and see the world and pursue this. And I just thought, well, if I'm gonna do it, I need to be where it is, and that was in Lexington. So I enjoyed it. I had a great college experience. I met some people that you wouldn't meet, in your own hometown, and socially it was great. The basketball team happened to be really good when I was there. I had a resurgence with Jamal Mashburn and some of those players. So it was great for me. And I again I kind of took that same level of competition to the classes. It's like so instead of having like maybe 30 kids in a class in high school, now like your freshman classes, you're in there with 300. Right, so it's like, oh, it's even more people I can beat. Right, so who's going to get the best score on this paper? Who's going to do this? It was just I just always took that level of competition into the classroom.
Were there any valuable things, and I'm sure there are things you learned, but were there any valuable things from your time in college that you still use today that are so valuable that they still help you in your everyday life or your job as well right now?
Oh yeah. The number one thing that college teaches you is how to learn, right? Now, when you're in high school and grade school, like the teachers are, they're giving you all the fundamentals, and they're pushing you in certain directions to work and to retain information and take tests. When you get to college, you have to choose a curriculum, right? Are you going to be a journalist? Are you going to be a biologist? Are you going to major in music? Like, so that is your choice. Within that, then you have to do certain things to obtain your degree, right? Inevitably, though, most likely, you're going to have to take some classes that you don't have much interest in, right? But if you're like me, you still want to do well, you want to have good grades, and maybe you have to have a certain standing as it relates to a scholarship opportunity, all those things, right? And so you have to learn something that you otherwise wouldn't have learned, or you have to develop the skills necessary from a time management standpoint to take in information, process it, and then explain it to show how well you know it, right? That is learning how to learn. And so now, as a sportscaster, I've had to do that several times on different assignments. I mean, I've been to two Olympics. I was covering events I'd never covered before, especially when I went to the Winter Olympics in South Korea. Like, I've never been on a snowboard,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I had to cover Shaun White and Chloe Kim as they were making history there. So there was a lot of learning I had to do in order for me to be in a position to adequately cover that story. Or being in a position where, let's say it's breaking news, um, and you got a short period of time to get in position to provide this information. All right. How quickly can you retain it? How are you taking your notes to be out there to where you don't need them once you start talking? That I learned in college. And then the other thing that college teaches you, it teaches you how to get along with people that you probably wouldn't associate with, right? Because it's way more people in a college environment, whether it's in your classes, sometimes in a group project, people you wouldn't rock with outside the class, but now you have to get something done with those people who aren't from where you're from, don't look the way you look. Sometimes they're the language they're speaking is their second language, not their first, but you still got to do something with these people to get something accomplished. That's what it teaches you as well. It teaches you how to network. It teaches you how to deal with certain situations when you're the minority or sometimes when you're the majority.
Right.
Like, when I was growing up, it was rare that I was in all black environments. Oftentimes in the class, I was the only black kid in my class. Um, so outside of my family, it was rare that I was in an all black environment. So again, all of those things that you learn in college, um, you take with you, whether you're thinking about it or not, to your career, and usually they benefit you in some capacity.
You mentioned earlier you spent quite a good amount of time in Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
What was, because it was a very good transitioning point as well during that time for you as well. What was the environment like in Memphis, and how did you adapt to a much bigger and new environment than the places that you have lived and grew up in before?
Yeah, because Memphis, I went from market 69 in Lexington to market 40 in Memphis, which is a pretty significant jump
Right.
on average for most people who do what we do. Um, but it was still in the South, right? And I grew up in the South. Kentucky, we're the northern border of the South, but Kentucky's still a southern state. So culturally, it was an easy transition. It wasn't like I had to go to, I don't know, maybe Denver, Colorado, or some other market that I didn't really have, know much about. Didn't really grow up in winter situations like that. Um, and plus, there were a lot of black people in Memphis, so that made me comfortable as well. So from that transition standpoint, it was easy. But then for me, the transition was going to a place that was a college town, right? I mean, they had minor league baseball there. Um, the Titans had been there for a brief second as they made the transition to Nashville, but it was still a college town. University of Memphis reigned supreme, and then you had Ole Miss down the road, Arkansas across the river. Like, it was a college environment. But then when the Grizzlies came, that changed everything in the city, and they were trying to get professional sports to come to Memphis. And so going from that to then covering the Grizzlies, covering Michael Jordan when he came there with the Wizards because they played the Grizzlies. Like that was me stepping my game up. But that's also what I wanted though, right? I wanted to take my skills to the next level and test them to make sure I think I'm on the right path to being good at what I do. And Memphis gave me that opportunity, and I fully wasn't expecting it. Like I was expecting to cover more major colleges as in addition to just like the University of Kentucky, which I covered. Now I'm covering multiple teams in the SEC, plus Memphis, who has a history of basketball and things of that nature. But when the Grizzlies came, or when the Mike Tyson Lennox Lewis fight came, that was different. Those were big time events. Like that was one of the biggest sporting events of the year when that happened. And to be there firsthand, to be able to cover it, it just gave me um, the confidence that my skills were as good as others to be on that level, and then just keep working on the craft. And if it hadn't been for, I think, especially the Grizzlies moving to Memphis, I don't know if I would have made the jump to Los Angeles because I had covered that team, and I also got the opportunity to do sidelines for them on local television there. When the people in LA were looking for someone at Fox Sports West, they saw someone who had NBA experience, and the
Hmm.
number one thing they had then was the Lakers. And I'd covered some Laker games when they played the Grizzlies, so that transition was easy socially, and then professionally is exactly what I needed at that time.
You mentioned something earlier that stuck with me. And you were talking about how important it is for people that are trying to become journalists to put in work behind closed doors, doing things
Mm-hmm.
to help prepare them when they get into the real world. Um, how much time do you spend personally going over your notes, looking at stats beforehand a show, reading, and how much reading is important for journalists, how much writing is important for journalists, how much time do you spend on a day or a week basis preparing for stuff like that? Because again, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, that you never know what's going to happen, so you have to be prepared to talk about things just to be backed up as well. How important is that, and how much do you prepare yourself for stuff like that?
For me, at this stage in my career, in August of 23, to be 30 years since I got my first job in broadcast television. It varies for me now, and I don't have to do as much now as I did when I was younger. Obviously, right? It varies for me based on the sports. Like some sports, I just know inside and out, and I'm actually just getting information without trying sometimes, right? Because I'm just interested in certain things. So I'm looking around where it's not like I'm doing it specifically um, for a show that night, right? Just over the course of the day, I know what's happening in the NBA. I know what's happening on the PJ Tour. Like I just kind of get that in. Now, if I'm going to do a UFC pay-per-view event, that's different because in addition to the main event or the co-main events, if they're title fights, there's a whole other card of fighters that not everyone knows, including me, right? Oftentimes there's someone who's coming up like this could be the next great prospect. Da, da, da. So I've got to do a little bit of research on my own to know exactly who this person is for that moment when we have to discuss that fighter more in depth than we have planned. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, but you have to be prepared for it. Now, thankfully, where I'm now, we have an entire team of researchers that can provide me with any information I need, right? Um, but I do take it upon myself to go and look for things that have been written about certain athletes to give context to the stats, right? But again, that varies based on the assignment. Like I'll do when I got to the Masters coming up in April, I will do more research than I typically would week to week because the Masters is it's such a big event for us. Our coverage starts usually on Sunday, right? The Sunday before. And then I dual roles in Augusta. I not only anchor our sports center coverage, but also do the interviews with players after the round. So that's two different roles I have. So I need, a little bit more context for who I may be talking to. Okay, like certain players are going to come in because of their status. But if some guy comes out and shoots 65 on Thursday, we're going to want to talk to him, and we may not know who it is yet. So you got to be prepared in that regard, and that's why all that additional research and stuff matters prior to you get to the event. But for me, it varies now just because of how long I've been doing this.
Going back to your transitionings, now this is a real life altering move for you. You're talking about growing up in the South, but now you're in LA, the Hollywood, the bright lights. What was that transformation like for you? And also, what were some things that you initially we're not used to in LA that maybe we're not the same back home?
Uh, the people. I mean, it's the second largest market in the country, and there are a lot of people in Los Angeles. I mean, a lot of people, and the traffic is as bad as everyone says.
Hmm.
And one of the things, the biggest thing that tripped me out is that, I don't care where you live, you've been in a traffic jam before, right? But usually in most places, it's either the result of an accident or construction, not congestion, right? So oftentimes you're driving around in LA, you're on a freeway and you're bumper to bumper for about, 15, 20 minutes. And all of a sudden you get to a certain point and everyone just takes off. I'm like, where's the accident? Where's the construction? Why is it okay here, but it wasn't okay to, like, half a mile back there? So that was a trip getting used to just from a driving standpoint. But what I loved about Los Angeles is that no matter what you're into from a personal standpoint, LA had it, and the weather was spectacular, right? So if you were about playing golf as I am, you can play it 12 years out of the year, which to me was just phenomenal. If you enjoy listening to live music, there are limitless places you can go to listen to live music. So from that standpoint, I love Los Angeles, and I still love it. And eventually, I plan to move back there at some point in my life because I just love that area so much. Um, Professionally, what I had to get used to was the volume of sports, right? Because when I made the transition, I was still doing local sports, right? So that's 3 minutes, 4 minute segments. Sometimes on the weekends they give us more because they like sports. But
Hmm.
now I'm anchoring, a full hour news show. Back when I first started there, we had a show called SoCal Sports Report. It was basically a local sports center. So to go from 3 or 4 minutes a night to a full hour with a co-anchor, that was a transition. I'd done it before. But that was what I wanted to do. So I look forward to the opportunity. And then, so like almost every night was an event because you did have the Clippers, you had the Lakers, they share the same building. You also had the Kings that played in that same building, right? And so during that time of the year, as we had the Ducks in Anaheim, not only could you have a game every night, sometimes you get 2 or 3 games every night, right? So in that regard, it was awesome, but it was an adjustment because um, I just hadn't done that volume of work before.
Mr. Hughes, any favorite sports players, sports teams growing up or either even now that you've always loved to celebrate or enjoyed watching it all?
When I was younger, I had favorites. I used to be a Mets fan because I thought Darryl Strawberry was like one of the coolest players
Hmm.
ever. I was a Lakers fan because Magic Johnson. I was a Raiders fan because Marcus Allen won the Heisman, I think, when I was like 10 or 11 years old. Um, but eventually, all those professional allegiances went away. Um, it wasn't a conscious decision. It was more subconscious because I just didn't. I don't want to have an emotional investment in the outcome of something that I'm covering, right? So I just think it would cloud my judgment potentially, and kind of make it harder to do my job effectively if I really wanted the Lakers to win and they didn't. And what attitude am I taking into the locker room to ask questions when I should be a blank sponge to find out exactly from their perspective what happened, right? Now you can look at stats and say, well, they turned the ball over too much, or they didn't shoot well enough from the free throw line. All those things. I mean, that's just stats, whatever. But I didn't want to go in there mad at Ron Artest or Shaq because
Hmm.
they threw the ball away, right? But that's how fans react. I can't do that. The only thing that I still have a visceral reaction to is Kentucky basketball and football when they're playing well, obviously. But the basketball expectation is much greater at Kentucky. But I mean, I've been fortunate to meet um, a lot of phenomenal athletes. As a basketball player, Charles Barkley was my idol because we were both undersized playing the position we played. And now Charles is a really good friend of mine. That's been incredible. Um, you know, Tiger Woods is 3 years younger than me, and I played junior golf, so I knew who he was. And granted, he's obviously a much better player. Don't even. I'm not trying to make the comparison, but to see someone of my age go out and accomplish all the things he did, and the number of times I've spent time with him, talking to him, watching him hit balls, like that's been a phenomenal experience. And I got to meet Pele. Like, granted he just passed away recently, but I mean that he may be at one point the most famous athlete in the world.
Right.
And I had a chance to interview him, and he couldn't have been more gracious. And I can just go down the list of all these different people, and it's just like sometimes you look back on your life, and it's like you can be amazed at what you've accomplished. And oftentimes for me, I've always been a head down, head up guy. What's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? Yes, this is exactly what I want to do. All right, so what am I going to do next? What am I going to do next? And I don't look back that much. But as I've gotten older, I just turned 50 last summer, you get a little more reflective. And as you turn around and look back, you're like, damn, I did that. Oh shit, I met that person too. Like, wow, like I was there for Kobe's 81-point game,
Yeah.
right? I was there for the kick six game between Auburn and Alabama. Um, I was there when Tiger won his 15th major at Augusta in 2019. Like those things, just sort of pile up. And you're like, wow, like I've met some of the greatest to do what they do, and that's exactly what I wanted to do coming out of college, was to be the person at those events talking to those people.
Can I ask you, because you talk so much about golf, and for me, when people are kind of focusing on SportsCenter or ESPN, you're kind of like the notoriety golf guy for me, and how much they focus on you as attending events for golf and being the reporter there and gaining facts, putting it back on the show. How awesome has it been for you over the last couple of years and to be at Masters, to be at major golf events, to talk to people like Tiger Woods, who you said you've loved watching him, not only as a black man, but someone that has accomplished so much. What has it been like for you to be around a game that you love so much and also take it to new heights as well, to be something a part of it that hasn't been done before?
The Masters is my favorite event of the year, and it was my favorite event before I started going there.
Hmm.
It's like one of the things my father and I bonded around was golf, but specifically that event. And so professionally, it was always a bucket list for me to be able to cover the Masters. And then when I started doing the interviews with players a couple of years ago, um, that to me is probably the most proud accomplishment I have. Because if you look at the history of the Masters, relatively speaking, compared to other major events in sports, there's only been a handful of people who are actually on the telecast itself. And with ESPN doing Thursday and Friday coverage in cooperation with CBS, when we are on the air and they put up the slate of announcers, commentators, again, there's only a handful. Michael Eaves is on there. Put that on my tombstone. Put that on the back of my tombstone, Masters commentators, whatever year, and Michael Eaves interviews, right? I'm very proud of that. Especially as a person of color, I'm very proud of that. I just wish, my dad was still living where he could see that.
Hmm.
Um, by far, that is personally, my greatest accomplishment is becoming a commentator on the Masters telecast.
Can I ask you, out of a serious but joking way as well, because I remember my conversation with Jay, uh, and we talked so much about being a color, and being a black man in this field. Have you ever, while being a journalist or even pursuing when you were growing up, been treated differently because of the color of your skin? And if so, how did you kind of try to just move forward because of it?
Yo, that's a pretty good question and a really good one to end on. Of course, I have. Sometimes good, mostly bad, right? Now, we have to be honest about certain things. One, there, as of late, especially, there's been a push to put more people of color on television, representation, right? But that wasn't always the case, and it certainly wasn't the case when I first started. Um, so it was tough at times, and the irony was there were certain people in the industry who thought I was getting opportunities simply because I was black, when the complete opposite was actually happening. Or I've had one coworker actually one time who made a comment because I got an interview. I got a not just an interview, but I got a good interview with a, a black athlete, and he was engaging more so than he typically is. And the white reporter that I worked with at the time basically said to me, "Well, he talked to you because you're black, right?" As opposed to, "No, maybe I just asked better questions than you, or maybe I established a rapport with him prior to the interview over the course of several weeks, and I didn't just go up to him when I needed something with a microphone in my hand to shove in his face, right? Maybe it was that." So yeah, that stuff has happened. But growing up when I grew up and where I grew up, you have to expect it. So it never affected me. Are you bothered? Sure. Like, how dare you? But it didn't impact me in a negative way in terms of how I was going to do my job or not do my job as well or anything. It wasn't a deterrent at all because I halfway expect that stuff. Um, but you have to understand that not everyone is rooting for you, and that's fine. They don't have to. You have to understand that some people are competing for the same opportunity as you, and they may try to do things to put in your path that prevent you from getting there before them. You have to expect that, right? And you have to navigate that. But it's not an excuse for you not to achieve your goals. You have to keep going. If you have to come up with other ways to get around something, fine. If there's a basket, if you're a football player and you're running around the end and you're trying to score a touchdown and some guy falls in front of you, are you going to stop, wait for him to get up, or are you going to run around him or jump over his ass and go and score the touchdown? It's the same thing. There's going to be obstacles that you face that other people may not face. It's not an excuse. You have to come up with ways to get over those obstacles to get to where you are going because they are not in your corner. They are not on your team. And in a lot of regards, they don't matter. You matter. This is your path. This is your goal. You have to achieve it regardless. And hey, if you can find a way to, you know, find an advantage of being a person of color, hell, do it. Knock yourself out because you deserve it, right? Because so many other times you didn't get it because you were black. They're gonna give it to you now. Go take it and then run with it and make it even better. But it's not an excuse. Embrace who you are. Embrace your originality, even when you are the minority in a room. Speak up. Use your voice. Be who you are, and just keep pushing. And if you do that, you're going to be successful. You may not reach the ultimate goal of whatever that could be, but that does not mean you won't be successful, right? And it's not if you don't reach it, it's not because you're black. It's not because you're a woman. It's not because of whether minority status you want to put on it. It's because simply you didn't figure out a way to make it happen. When you've seen countless examples of other people who did, that's on you.
I know we're short on time, and I just want to say again, thank you, Mr. Eaves, for joining me, sitting down, talking with me. It has meant the world. It's meant the honor to me. And also, your advice is, I hope, not only just touch me, but touch other people watching and listening as well when this comes out. So thank you for your words of advice, and thank you for sitting down with me.
No problem, man. Best of luck to you.
Thank you so much. God bless you, and God bless you all for listening. I please hope you enjoyed as much as I did. I learned so much, and hope you did, and shared a laugh with us as well. God bless you all, and please have a great 2023. I know we're starting off a little rough, but please continue blessing all the more people around you. God bless you all. Thank you.